All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon. This is City Wildlife Duck Watch Training 2021 edition. So I'm going to share my screen now. And you can see some nice ones. There we go. There we go. I'm going to move this. There we go. So I'm here with Ann Lewis. Ann Lewis is co-founder of City Wildlife, and she is the founder of Duck Watch, which actually emerged out of need in the community. So before we even had a rehab center, we were getting calls about ducks nesting in people's backyards or in front of their building where they work, etc. Ducks trapped on roofs or in courtyards. And so Anne and other volunteers started to learn what to do to respond to these citizens. And that is how Duck Watch was first established. So I first want to acknowledge that ducks are everywhere. Our mallards and other species that we have here in DC, they don't see rural habitat and urban habitat, they just see habitat. And yes, there are really ducks at the White House. So a little bit about what Duck Watch does. The first thing is to protect and assist nesting ducks and their ducklings throughout Washington, DC. And that includes capturing and reuniting trapped families. So sometimes it's more than simply providing a walk to water. We also do a lot of work with public and private entities that really need a design solution that could facilitate the duck's natural behavior. So the most common example there would be a ramp, and I'll talk about ramps later. We contribute to research via citizen science. So some of you who have been with Duck Watch for a while know that we collect a lot of data. That helps us to assess what's going on in the population. And we also are partnered with the National Park Service to do some of this. And there's also a human component. We want to build an educated, connected community of duck-friendly humans. So humans who understand the waterfowl in their midst and know how to help them. And that's why we encourage you to take this training even if you are not going to volunteer for Duck Watch. And Anne's going to talk a little bit about the waterfowl.
So when you first get a call as a volunteer and somebody says there's a bald eagle in their yard, you come out and you find it's a mallard. This is typical. So one of the things that volunteers have to know is immediately what species are we dealing with when you see it. And these are the most common species in DC, and they're familiar to most of us, but there are some wrinkles that you need to know about. The mallard female and the mallard male are shown in, the male shown in breeding plumage, his distinct green head and white band, and the female looks like this all year round. But you'll see as they molt, they change their appearance. Another species we get a lot of, but they're much more furtive and difficult to see, are the wood ducks. What's interesting about the wood ducks is that the distinguishing feature when they're in molt is their eye. The male has a reddish eye and a dark pupil, and the female has a dark eye and a very distinct white ring around it. And when you see the molting pictures, you'll see why that's important. And then of course we have Canada geese, who the males and the females are very similar. So that's, next slide, April. That's what the adults look like. The ducklings are harder to distinguish. These are 1 or 2 day old ducklings that we're looking at here. And the mallard and the wood duck only differ from each other because of the lack of a black eye stripe from the wood duckling's eye to its bill. You'll see the mallard has a continuous stripe all the way from the back of the head to the bill. The wood duckling is missing that connector from the eye to the bill. And otherwise, these ducklings look identical to the point where I was once at someone's pool and I picked up what I thought was a mallard duckling out of their pool. And it wasn't until our staff at City Wildlife pointed out to me that I'd picked up a wood duckling that I realized, oh my God, he was kind of more active in the crate than I thought a mallard would be. Wood ducklings are very hyper. And here I am giving the lecture and I didn't even recognize the difference. So they're very hard to tell apart. The gosling is easier. The difference in goslings and ducklings is really most pronounced in the beak, because the goose ferrets around in grass and is looking for grubs and insects in grass. It has a tweezer-like pointed bill to root around in the vegetation, whereas a dabbler, the duckling, is used to skimming the surface of water to filter invertebrates and weeds into its mouth. So it has a flat kind of flapper-like bill. The ducklings eat pretty much anything. They eat a lot of aquatic vegetation. They'll eat terrestrial vegetation. And you'll often see them tail up in the water. When you see that, they're rooting around into the muck in the water, looking for invertebrates and algae and so forth. But they also eat grains and grass seeds and a lot of invertebrates, even from the ground. The geese tend to be mostly grass eaters. You'll see hundreds of them down on the mall sometimes poking around in the grass. So the mallards, one of the reasons the mallards have survived so well in our urban environment is that they eat so many different sorts of things. So now we're looking at the molting ducks. The mallard and the Canada goose up at the top, they're not molting, they're just growing up. This is a duckling and a gosling at about 4.5 to 5 weeks of age. You can see the mallard starting to lose its down and get its feathers. And at this point, it's pretty easy to distinguish the goose from the duck. The lower picture shows the situation when the males molt. On the left is a molted male who, if you could see the rest of the picture, looks identical to a female at that point. The only difference, and the only way you can tell a molting male from a female, is that the male has a yellow bill and the female has a mottled bill, similar to the picture of the mallard juvenile at the top. Otherwise, they can look identical. And people often say to us, gee, the whole pond is filled with females. And we say, no, they're just molt. Molting usually occurs after breeding season, when the young are growing up in the pond and the males don't really want to travel too far anyway, because they're not flighted when they molt. They can fly across the pond, but they can't do flight like migration or any serious flight. So these can be very confusing. In the wood duck, this is where you need to know the eye condition of the wood duck. This is a molting male wood duck. And you can see the red around the eye rather than the white. If it were a female, it would be white. Next. So the behavior of ducks and geese is very different in terms of their reproduction and nesting sites. First of all, geese mate for life and ducks don't. Ducks tend to mate for a season, and they can mate for multiple seasons. But very often they'll switch partners at the end of the season. That's one fundamental difference. The other fundamental difference is the type of nest site they choose. You can see the mallard on the left, who's all snuggled up in this, I don't know, begonias, is that what those are? Hidden and very much camouflaged in the environment. And then on the geese on the right, you see they're in an open area. There's a reason for this, and that is the flight pattern if they need to escape. You can think of the mallard as a helicopter. In other words, if she's spooked, she can fly literally vertically out of that space. And so it's no problem for her to be surrounded by vegetation. Whereas the goose is more like a 757 that needs a long runway. It's a heavy-bodied vehicle, and it needs a long runway to take off, which is why the geese tend to nest in open sites. Another issue with geese and ducks, another difference, is that the male is always present when the female is incubating her eggs, if it's a goose. Whereas with a mallard duck, the male and the female will scout out their nest sites about now. They're starting to come in as pairs. They've made it up over the winter. They're coming in as pairs and they're scouting out nest sites. So you'll see pairs of mallards around the city just kind of hanging out, checking out these environments. They pick the nest site together, but the minute the nest site is selected, the male takes off and doesn't return for the entire incubation period. He goes to the water source, and it's a prearranged water source with the female. And he lets her incubate the eggs. And the reason for that is he doesn't want to attract any kind of attention to his mate's nest. So the similarities between these two animals are that they're both looking for nest sites out of the wind, away from predators, and they'll both nest on balconies, terraces, and green roofs. And the fact that they're nesting on balconies, terraces, roofs, and in enclosed courtyards is what makes our work so necessary. So once the nest is selected for the mallard, this starts what I consider a totally amazing process of egg development and laying. She'll select her nest and she wiggles around in it, just moving her breast in the earth to create an indentation, which is called a scrape. The mallard nest is called a scrape. Once she's gotten an indentation, she then pecks out all the down feathers in her breast to create what's called a brood patch. In other words, a bare breast. And what the brood patch does is serve as a heating pad for the eggs. She'll lay one egg a day until she's laid all of her eggs. Typically, we find that there'll be 8 to 12 eggs in a clutch, but I've seen up to 16 eggs in a clutch. And these eggs need to be incubated for 26 to 30 days, and they need to be rotated to get even development of the embryo. So she has to turn these eggs about 4 times a day, and each one has to be kept to about 99 degrees. So she's a very busy little lady. She's constantly lifting up onto her feet, moving her eggs around and rotating them so that each one has a time against her brood patch, which is her heating pad for these eggs. She only leaves 3 or 4 times a day to get her own food, and she'll be gone for 45 minutes. And when she's gone, she'll typically cover her eggs either with leaves or with some of the fuzz from her breast so that they're hidden. And then she comes back and broods them again. She only starts incubating after the last egg is laid. So you can figure if she started incubating when the first egg was laid, their development could be as much as 2 weeks off. So she doesn't incubate till they're all laid so that they all hatch in one day. They're born with something called a yolk sac, which is a residual portion of the yolk that's kind of embedded in their abdomen. And that yolk sac will sustain the duckling for 48 hours. It doesn't need any food or water during that time. Since ducklings are precocial, the mother never feeds the ducklings. Her job is to lead them to water, to lead them to food, and to keep them protected from predators and warm. So she has 48 hours during which her intention is to lead them to the water source where she knows her drake is waiting for her, and then she won't return to the nest. Next. So here's the miracle of egg development. This is a candling of eggs showing from laying to hatching. And what's important to notice here is how the air pocket at the top of the egg increases as the embryo absorbs the moisture in the egg. So by the time you're down to day 26 or 28 at the bottom, that air pocket can create as much as a quarter or a third of the volume of the egg. And the eggshell and the latex membrane is porous. And so oxygen can actually get into that air pocket, which means that by the time of hatching, the duck actually starts life you might say, within the egg, it sticks its bill up into the air pocket and starts breathing. This happens a couple of days before hatching. And the day before hatching, something miraculous called pipping starts to happen. The duck has an egg tooth, which is a little, you'll see it on the left. It's that pimple on the duck's bill. That's a domestic duck, but the egg tooth is the same. It's that pimple on the end of the bill. It's a little bit of keratin, hard, and it allows the duckling to penetrate the shell with this little hard pecking. But in addition to the tapping noises of pecking, these ducklings are also starting to communicate vocally with little sounds. And that starts this long tradition of vocalization between ducklings, among ducklings, and between ducklings and parent. And you'll see as we go on how important the vocal communication between the mother duck and the ducklings is. That's how they locate each other. That's how ducklings that are lost reunite with their mother. So the pipping announces to each other, okay, guys, time to jump out of here. Let's get this show on the move. We're pipping and mama can hear us, and they all hatch at once. Next slide.
So we just told you a lot. I wanted to pause for questions, either verbally or in the chat.
I don't see any questions.
I have one.
Okay.
I just, when you said they're usually within a mile from a water source.
Mhm.
So what would define a water source? Because I'm kind of worried because there's a creek sort of near me, and then it's fine now as a creek, but it does completely almost disappear in the summer. But there is a pair of ducks there.
Yeah, the water source can vary a lot depending on where you're located. In DC, the typical destinations for our ducks are the river, the C&O Canal, the pools on the mall, the reflecting pools, and what am I missing, April? The canal, the river, Rock Creek.
Rock Creek, the reservoir.
Yeah, they tend to be urban
Right.
water sources, but really, as long as these ducklings only need a season to be raised. So if it's a stream that dries up in the winter, that's fine. It'll be there for the ducklings.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So I'm going to show you a little bit about duckling growth. When we monitor at some of our regular locations, I asked volunteers to say, okay, how many ducklings did you see that were 2 to 3 weeks old? How many 3 to 4 weeks, etc. And for a new volunteer, that can be pretty challenging. So basically, what we're looking for is, if you see the duckling on the top left, pretty much into the third week of their life, they're going to be covered with down. So it's got that fluffy duckling cuteness going on. And then the first feathers start to appear when they're 36 to 45 days. So around 4 weeks, they start to look scruffy. So this is the awkward adolescent stage. And then when they're around 6 to 7 weeks, their new feathers are in, but they're not developed. So if you look at this duck, he's got like little mounds on the back. And when that duck is fully grown, you'll see where those feathers are now just a little mound. They'll be long and they'll actually cross and make an X on the duck's back. So I'm going to go briefly through some problems that we encounter in an urban setting. And then after that, we'll actually talk about solutions to the problems. So predators are a problem. Seagulls probably prefer your French fries to ducklings, but they are known to be predators. Crows are a big problem, and they hunt in groups. And so, um, it's unfortunate, but if you have, a duck family running around on a roof where there's no place for them to hide, chances are a few or maybe even all the ducklings are going to get predated by crows if they're not if the family isn't rescued promptly. People. So what you see in the top, this is a nest downtown, and looks like somebody's brought her some takeout there on the right on a plate, and in front of her, they've brought her a red velvet cupcake. So what was a very well camouflaged nest is now not so camouflaged, and that food can also attract rats. The bottom picture is somebody decided to wrap a nest in a scarf, which of course is totally unnecessary. Barriers and heights on walk to water. Little ducklings can only jump a few inches, and so some of our urban landscape makes it really challenging for them to get where they need to go. And street grates. So in this picture, mom's walking across the grate and she makes it across, and where are her ducklings? Gutters are also a problem in the same way. Areaways don't swallow up ducklings, but if mom leads her family down a staircase into an areaway, they're trapped, they can't get out. Traffic is a problem. It's not our biggest problem. Our drivers are usually pretty courteous, but they have to know why the traffic is being stopped. And if they don't, they can get kind of irate. So it's certainly something we need to help out with. And finally, swimming pools. So for obvious reasons here, what you're seeing, one, the duckling is in the filter, and two, that duckling can't get out of that water. And ducklings are not waterproof. In 1 to 2 hours, they're going to be in some serious trouble.
So one of the things that's a challenge for us, or you as rescuers, once you've captured the family that's trapped, what do you do with them? Where are the appropriate places to put them? And of course, we're always trying to figure out where the mom wants to go, where her drake is waiting for her. But we also need to consider the actual river environment of that location, because since the ducks aren't waterproof, they can only swim for a couple of hours before they start getting waterlogged. So they have to be able to get out of the water. And similarly at night, the mom needs to take them to land to brood them overnight. So when you're looking at a release site, you're looking not only for the obvious things, food and no predators, but you're also looking for a natural riverbank, or as it's termed now, a living shoreline. Unfortunately, in Washington, we don't have a lot of living shorelines. You can go to the next slide. If you look at the map of Washington, almost the entire Anacostia River has seawalls along it. And that's because the Corps of Engineers, I think it was in the 30s, dredged the Anacostia River to make it navigable. And in the process, they put seawalls almost the entire length of the Anacostia River. And that's now a big environmental issue, because these seawalls also increase the risk of water buildup and flooding in areas that aren't seawalled. So there's a big effort to remove seawalls along the Anacostia River, but of course it's hard to do now that they're built. And then as you go into the Potomac River, all of the Washington Channel, which is from Haynes Point up to the Jefferson Memorial on this map, that's all channelized. That's all got seawalls completely along it. And then on the river side of it, all of the Haynes Point is seawalled. Theodore Lincoln Memorial has seawalls. The Kennedy Center has seawalls. And you don't get to a natural riparian edge until you get past Key Bridge on Georgetown. So really the only place that is really good for ducks in our riverine environment is Theodore Roosevelt Island, which of course is completely natural. But then we hit the jurisdictional problem. Although Theodore Roosevelt Island is owned by the district, you have to go into Virginia to get there. And Virginia won't let us transport ducklings to Theodore Roosevelt Island because we have to pass through Virginia. So this drives us nuts, and we're trying to work with Virginia Department, I think it's called Department of Natural Resources now, it used to be VDGIF, to see, can't we just transport our ducks to Theodore Roosevelt Island? Next.
Yeah, so we've given you some of the challenges. So now we're going to talk about what you can do to help. And so there's really 5 topics here: protecting the nest, getting to water, freeing trapped families, rehabilitating orphans, and educating the public. So the nest, this is the same nest that I showed you earlier with that had all the food. This is what it looked like when she nested. So she's basically hiding in plain sight. That's a busy street, but most of the people walking by had no clue they were walking by a nesting duck. So if you work in the building that this tree is in front of and you want to help the duck, one of the things you want to keep in mind is to avoid drawing attention. That said, sometimes we need to prevent human duck accidents. So if the nest were right by the curb, we might consider putting up a barrier or some caution tape so that somebody doesn't accidentally step out of their car and step into the nest. We discourage feeding. We organize a team. So, you and your coworkers, there might be, people in the parking garage next door. There might be some security guards, different folks who can kind of keep an eye out. Definitely report any vandalism, any stolen eggs to Animal Care and Control. Putting up a sign, we don't recommend except in special circumstances because it attracts attention. Leaving water, you generally don't need to, but again, if it's, the middle of summer and she doesn't have any shade, a clear, inconspicuous dish of water could be very much appreciated. So helping on the walk to water. I'm going to show you I'm going to talk about some best practices, and then I'm going to show you a video and ask you to think about what the escorter is doing well and what they're not doing so well. So the first thing is to maintain a clear path in front of the duck. She's not like a cat or a dog where you can get in front of them and say, come on, come on, come on. That will never work. So where you want to place yourself is on the sides, and if you have enough people, in the rear. So to create basically a corridor for her. Obviously, blocking gutters, grates, areaways, making it and steering her away from those, or having a person stand on those. So you can place people where you don't want the ducks to go. Directing traffic, getting out there, getting the cars to stop. And finally, helping ducklings up curbs or steps. So it's a myth that if you touch a baby animal, that their parent will reject them. You definitely may pick up the duckling and put it up the curb, or just give it a little nudge. Okay, here we go. Whoops. There.
큰 수입아 이 혼자 할 거고. Komm, Mama, Ente. Hier durch. Oder Ente. Einfach hochreißen. Hier, einfach hochreißen. Hier, Ente, komm mal rüber. Einfach hoch. Hier ist zu Ende. Hier ist zu Ende. Wir haben. Coole Aktion. Coole Aktion.
Okay. So anybody, what was something that they did right?
Managing traffic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was very effective at stopping the traffic. What else? I see stopping traffic in the chat too.
Helping the ducklings past obstacles.
Mm-hmm. Helped him up the curb. Stood on the grates. Yeah, there was a grate, and the ducks weren't going. It didn't look like they were headed that way, but the officer was between the family and the grate, so that was good. What's in the beginning is standing to side. Now, what about when he lifted that barrier, that fence-like thing? What was wrong with that? Why didn't the duck go under? He was in front of the duck. Yeah, exactly. He was trying to get her to come exactly where he was, and she wasn't going to do it. So in that case, the barrier was not very long anyway, and she figured out how to go around, and everything was fine. But there was some stress there that could have been avoided. All right. So another thing that can make an escort a lot easier is if you have an idea of where mom wants to go. Because when she first starts walking with her ducklings, she knows where she wants to go, but she's not used to walking there. And so she might like go the wrong way, or she might look like she doesn't know where she's going. And so if you have a good sense, at least of which general direction she wants to go in, that can be very helpful. You can give her a little bit of a steer. So this map is from a couple years ago, and the greenish circles are places where there are nests, and the yellow ones are multiple nests we had on the same site. And then the red circled areas are different water sources where the ducks went. One thing that you don't see on this map is the eastern part of Capitol Hill. So pretty much anything from around Eastern Market and east of there, they're going to want to go to the Anacostia. And fortunately, the part of the Anacostia around RFK Stadium, Congressional Cemetery, etc., is not channelized, and so that's actually a safe place they can go. So Anne is going to talk about some options for trap ducks.
So most of our work as volunteers is handling situations where the mother can't get her ducklings to water. And there are several ways that we handle this depending on the situation. And I'll go through some of them with some videos, and you'll see the option. Obviously, the goal is to handle the ducklings as little as possible, and the duck, and also to facilitate their natural behavior. So the simplest thing we can do is if the ducks are simply trapped in an on-grade situation where they're close to water, and you can get them by opening doors, you can get them to water. All you have to do is open the doors and herd them again behind them to an open source where they can walk to water. So we'll look at one release without capture in the next video.
I think that these undocumented immigrants who have been essential workers during this pandemic should be on a fast track to citizenship.
For the last 10 years, mother ducks have been nesting their young in an enclosed courtyard at Glover Elementary School in Milton, Massachusetts. But after the babies are born, the mama has to bring them to water within 24 hours, and the only way to get there is through the school. The first babies were born last week, and the school children lined the hallways and had to remain quiet to help lead the new family directly to a nearby pond. But to Principal Sheila Cuxtis' surprise, on Tuesday morning, they heard a duck knocking on the window, waiting to be led with her 11 ducklings. Cuxtis tells InsideEdition.com that they didn't even know that the duck was there, and the entire school quickly lined up for the duck run. The elementary school even has a webcam to monitor the ducks. If they are born over a weekend or on a holiday, Principal Cuxtis will go to the school and let the ducks out. This isn't only a wonderful educational opportunity for the students, but helpful for the mama ducks. Be sure to watch Inside Edition.
So that was a release without capture. The next one is capturing and walking to water. What this is that you capture the ducklings, but you're able to not capture the mother and have her focus on the crate of the ducklings, and she will follow you to water. The next couple of videos that you're going to see, this was a situation on Capitol Hill where the mother had hatched her ducklings on top of a 2.5-story townhouse. And 2.5 stories is a little too far for ducklings to jump safely down from a roof. They can jump 2 stories, but 2.5, we really should rescue them. So we were able to rescue the ducklings and put them in a crate. But at that point, the mom flew off. And it was only because there was a bystander on the sidewalk who called up to us and said, "Hey, mom's down here in front of the building." We were able to go down with the crate of ducklings, and she, without capturing her, she simply followed our crate, and we walked her all the way to water. This was a 1.5 mile walk in the height of rush hour. And we took her to the Senate pool at Senate Park. So you'll see us walking her through traffic and walking her to the Senate pool.
You need to lock your front door. If it's closed.
And notice, as April's changing this, notice that she's communicating with them and they with her. They're peeping inside the crate and she's quacking. So that's a quick, but you get the. So capture and relocate is probably the most common one that we're called on to do. capture and relocate means that you have to capture both the mother and the ducklings, and then you take them in their crates to a water source and release them there. The video you're about to see is an NPR capture that we did. These ducks were, I think that building's 6 stories high, and it's on North Capitol Street. So obviously her destination was going to be the Capitol reflecting pool. At least we knew that, but there was no way these ducklings could get off the roof. So what you're going to watch here is us surrounding the ducklings with cardboard in order to capture them, and then capturing the mother by hand, which is we can sometimes do, and then releasing them at the Capitol reflecting pool.
Okay, we have an easy one. Oh my God. You stay there. I'll just break her in. Sometimes we get a little.
Are you allowed?
So those ducks were later released at the Capitol reflecting pool. Now, if capturing the mom, in that video, we were able to just capture the mom by hand because she was very calm and stayed along with her ducklings. And she was focused on the ducklings, and we were able to catch her by hand. Sometimes you can capture a duck by net, but we've found that that's a lot trickier than either a hand capture or leading her into an enclosed situation. And the net capture tends to make a mess of their feathers also. So if possible, we prefer a hand capture. Next. So now we'll talk about the shed capture. This is our most successful and probably our most common form of capture when we can't just lead the ducklings out of the building. A shed capture, what we're looking at here is a situation where a duck nested alongside a pool, and she thinks the pool is her final destination. And of course, that doesn't work because there's no food in the pool and the pool has another use. So in many situations on trapped roofs or in enclosed courtyards, we can find some sort of what we call a shed. And it can be literally a shed like this, or it can be an elevator enclosure or a vestibule, any sort of enclosed space that we can use. The principle is that you capture the ducklings first, and then you take the ducklings in the crate and put them inside the shed with another crate and another net inside the shed. And then you stand outside of the shed and behind the door, keeping the door open. And the peeping of the ducklings in the crate will attract mom into the shed. You shut the door, then you sneak yourself inside the shed, and you've got your net and your crate in there for mama. So you emerge with mama in a crate, the ducklings in a separate crate, and you can take them and relocate them. So what you're going to see in the next video is a situation where we had ducklings in a pool, and you'll see us ushering the ducklings up a ramp out of the pool with their mom. And then you'll see us with our cardboard cornering the ducklings up against a wall and putting them in the crate. And you'll also see mom flying off. The trick with a shed capture is that you want to move very slowly and deliberately, because you don't want mom to leave the site altogether. If she does, she will often come back, but it takes 45 minutes to an hour for her to come back. And sometimes she just leaves and never comes back. So we're moving deliberately. You'll see the mom duck fly up and around us, but she's staying within the area of the ducklings. And we don't actually have in this video the moment when she enters the shed, but she did enter the shed.
Is that Dave? Hello. I'm gonna end the video here, but the aim is to get the mom inside.
So that was a successful capture. Anne already talked a little bit about what to do if there isn't a shed. It could be inside somebody's condo or apartment. We've used storage rooms, building lobbies. So in this case, I think what's going on in this picture is at the very end, I think there's a shade pulled down there because there's glass and a glass door, and then it leads to some steps that lead up to a swimming pool. And so usually we catch the ducklings in the swimming pool, bring them down the steps, and mom comes down and we're able to lead her through the door. And I used to be really apprehensive that in a space like this, that the mom would just fly all over the building, but she doesn't. She finds that she's trapped and she flies against the window or door, and that makes her very easy to catch. We use disabled airlocks. So for instance, at the Botanic Garden, if you put those airlocks between the different the different climate spaces in the Botanic Garden, if you make those so they're only operable by hand, that's a great place to capture a duck. We've used a poolside bar. And I've also had some success at outdoor areas where there's really not an enclosed space, but there's an overhang. So if you can get mom to go under the overhang, you have a better chance of catching her. So a few best practices, remove like dangly, noisy jewelry, flying scarves, anything like that. Move slowly. Have a plan. So identify where you're going to try to capture mom, wherever that is. Have carriers ready. Always count the ducklings first and collect them first if you can. You noticed in the video and the swimming pool that when that one duckling escaped and got back to mom, that actually was like insurance that mom wasn't going to fly off, that mom was hanging out with her duckling right away. So that's something that you can do. If you do it, then you want to collect that duckling before you try to catch mom, because you don't want to accidentally injure the duckling while you're going for mom. Transport, separate carriers, because mom could accidentally trample her ducklings. So you want to keep her apart, but you can put the carriers facing each other so that they can see each other. If it's cold out or if the ducklings are wet, we like to use a hand warmer in the carrier under the towel. And then I already said close to each other. Release protocol, we've already talked about the slope to water. You don't want to release near predators, and also just drakes that aren't the mom's drake. They're going to bother her. Geese have been known to be very aggressive towards ducklings. So it doesn't mean you can't have any drakes or geese in the whole pool, but don't do the release right by where they are. We want to release in good weather. If it's raining or having a storm or whatever, we might postpone the release. So in that case, the duck family would be either at our rehab center or in the home of a licensed wildlife rehabber. You always want to release the ducklings first, and it doesn't hurt to have nets handy just in case. So now I'm going to show you the release of the ducks from the NPR roof.
Mom, you open the crate for mom.
Do I have to tip the crate?
No, she'll fly out.
Okay. So ready for the babies. Just tip it up. Make it vertical. Pour them out. That's it. Mom, let mom out.
Oh, mama.
Go out.
And with her babies.
Oh, here.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, got it. Let it out quickly. Throw it. That's it.
Remember, they can fall. They can go from 2 stories,
job,
is what you
Mom.
said. So that was easy.
Is that it? Is that mine?
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so when
Okay.
So we've been talking about mallards. Just a word about if you happen to engage with wood ducks. We had our first wood duck rescue last year, and it was an eye-opener. Everything we had learned about mallards was pretty much the opposite for wood ducks. For a start, mallard ducklings will always want to cluster together, so they're very easy to herd into a corner. Whereas wood ducks scatter. If they're interrupted, mom will fly up into a tree because she's a tree duck, and the ducklings scatter and radially all around the neighborhood. And so they're very hard to capture. And they're also a much higher stress animal than mallards. You'll never see the mallard mom hanging around the way the wood duck mom hanging around the way our mallard will. So the best thing to do if they're wood ducks is to let mom do her thing, back off, get all the people away from the situation. And eventually she'll fly from the tree and her ducklings will come to her. She also quacks, and then she can lead them to water, or perhaps you can help stop traffic. But you just can't capture them the way we do mallards. Equipment, we've been through this a little bit, but typical equipment for any rescue is nets of 2 sizes, one for the babies and one for the mom. The cardboard for herding is probably the most important of our equipment. We need the 2 carriers, one for mom, one for the babies. And the towels, it's good to line the crate with towels, because any animal, and we found this with all our rehab animals, animals who don't have traction are very stressed. So putting traction, something in the bottom of the crate, is very helpful. And we'll also cover the crate with another towel to prevent the animals from being stressed by traffic and noise and so on. Pool noodles, you saw how we use those as a boom in the pool. And most important, and April touched on this, is patience and creativity. You need to plan out plans A, B, C, D, and E when you're rescuing these ducks, because it's all up to what the mom is going to do after you start your rescue. And you need to be prepared with all the equipment for different kinds of capture and have them prioritized as you move through the whole rescue process.
Whoops, I did not want to do that. So can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that said, there are ways to do this without having a car full of equipment. So this is the backpack that I have come to prefer because it's big enough that I can put some personal effects in it too, but I've worked with a much smaller one and still carried this net, which is a net meant for fishing on a boat, so it's collapsible. And then these little nets are butterfly nets. They're great for ducklings, small ducklings. And in here I have, I'm not going to show you everything, but I have this zipper top bag. And on more than one occasion, I've used this for the mom duck. And I've used just a regular shopping bag for the ducklings. And if you do that, you do want to make sure that you fold down the top because they can pile on top of each other and get out. So that was just a little bit to say that, you know, don't worry if you don't have everything on this screen. There we go. Next. Oops. There. So before I talk about ramps, I want to pause again for questions. Okay, you'll have time to ask questions at the end too, so you can jot them down. Really simple solution to a lot of our urban issues with waterfall is just to provide a ramp. So here you have various, you know, ramps. This one is super low tech. This one's got a little more going on. This is called a scamper ramp. It's a commercially available product, and that's just so the ducklings can get in and out of the pool before they're relocated somewhere else. Here is the Capitol reflecting pool.
No, damn it. Okay, okay. That's fine. Yeah, we'll give it a good ramp now. There you go. Go here, go here. That's 3 more, that's fine. Oh, it worked! Ah, it worked! Get him over.
So I just want to say that before we worked with Architect of the Capitol to put the 2 ramps at this pool, getting ducklings into the water, and including ducklings that are adventurous and go over the side, then, you know, our volunteers would come and you have to round them up and and get them back in. That was almost an everyday occurrence. And now it's not even close. So that has really been a big help. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Here's more ramps. The one on the top left is at the sculpture garden. Here you can see two views of the same ramp, and then this one is built right into the wall. This is our latest ramp. This is on one of the floating islands at the wharf. So these are man-made islands. They are anchored to a weight down at the bottom, and then they flow back and forth with the tidal movement. And ducks and geese have been nesting on these islands, but that metal rim is high enough to where the ducklings can't get out. So we're going to have 3 of these ramps this year. And the idea is not only that animals who nest on the island can get off, but also that duck families that end up in the channel are going to have additional places where the moms can bring their ducklings out of the water to brood them. So we're really excited about that. Here's another idea, a floating ramp, and this one does have it did get a tether attached to it, so that can be used in places where it's more appropriate than a ramp that actually leads out of the water. This is just a place to get out. And don't try this one. First of all, it's not very stable. It's too steep. You really want to have a gentler angle. And even though ducklings are little, they like a wider ramp. So we don't recommend anything narrower than like a 12-inch ramp. But you learn.
So orphans, City Wildlife will raise orphans, but we have to know which ducklings are truly orphaned and when they need to be picked up. There are some general rules. If you see a lone duckling on land without a mother or without any brood nearby, it's orphaned. Pick it up, call City Wildlife, and get it to us as fast as possible. However, if you see that same lone duckling in water, it may not be orphaned. There may be its brood in the water somewhere else, and even fairly far away. Like if it's at the Capitol reflecting pool, it could be at the totally other end of the pool. And you'll generally see the duckling peeping when it's lost. But if you wait a few hours, it usually finds its way back to the brood. So don't be too quick to pick up a lone duckling out of water. Then there's the issue of fostering. We're often asked, well, I've picked up an orphan duckling. Can't I just find another brood somewhere in the city of the same age and dump it in with that brood and have that mama raise it? That actually does work with geese. Geese are very good parents. Both the male and the female are very attentive, and they'll accept a stranger into their midst as long as the stranger isn't bigger than their own goslings. But the mallard is totally different. If you put this orphan in with a mallard family, the mom's going to attack it and kill it almost immediately. So the only option for this duckling is to bring it to City Wildlife for rehab. I will say we have wonderful success raising ducklings. We handle about 150 a year, and we have an 85% release rate. They stay with us for about 8 weeks until they're flighted. And then we typically release them near Kingman Island in the Anacostia. So you can be assured that if you get it to us, it's going to have a happy ending. If you do pick up an orphan duckling or ducklings, sometimes you'll see 2 of them together, and you'll find them like they drop into areaways. They're usually lost when the mother walks them to water. They'll drop into areaways, or they'll be trapped because they couldn't get up a curb and there was nobody to help them, and then the brood walks on. The mom doesn't stop. She's got too many to worry about. So if you do happen to pick one up, keep it in its carrier or in some sort of box, but preferably not a cardboard box, which can get water soaked. Put a towel on the bottom, put a shallow pan of water in it, and you'll find that the duckling almost immediately jumps into the water. Take the water away overnight because they can drown in a pan of water. And don't give it any food. You can give it finely shredded romaine, but it typically isn't going to eat it. It's very stressed, and it's generally best not to feed it anything. And then contact your licensed wildlife rehabber in DC. That would be us. The laws. Waterfowl, all waterfowl are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So that you can't kill them or mess with their nests or poison them or any of those things. However, the Good Samaritan principles do cover your ability to rescue animals in need if they're sick, injured, or orphaned. And you can hold them for 24 hours while you contact a licensed wildlife rehabber. This is true even of veterinarians. Unless the veterinarian has permission to handle wildlife, vets too can only keep wildlife 24 hours. And of course, you can never keep wildlife as pets. If you've got a situation where your duck is repeatedly nesting in an inappropriate place, you are allowed to dissuade the mother from nesting in that place as long as she hasn't officially nested and has eggs in the nest. And you can do that by harassing her gently, like banging a broom on the ground or waving your arms. And there's also a product called Liquid Fence that's a grape juice concentrate that they hate the smell of, and you can spray it over your bushes. The problem with Liquid Fence is that it washes off in the rain, so you have to keep doing it. But the minute she lays eggs, she and her nest are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and you have to back off and let them hatch.
So I'll take another pause for questions before I talk about volunteer opportunities.
I have a question. This is Francoise.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was wondering about the challenges that might come up when you're stopping traffic, and what the basic rules are. How do volunteers deal with the potential hazard of stopping traffic?
Yes, thank you for that. So first of all, you never want to put yourself in danger. So be aware of your surroundings. Second of all, we do provide for our volunteers reflective vests that say Duck Watch on the back, and it gives you also a little bit more authority because you've got the vest on. And I usually hold my nets in both hands and wave my arms so that, be with really big, bold motions. So it's very, very clear that I'm trying to stop traffic. And we also enlist the help of local police. If they're around, we don't even have to ask them, they just help us. I've had officers in patrol cars actually block intersections so that we could go by. So the police are a really, really wonderful resource. So more closer to RFK Stadium, I found that the drivers are a little more aggressive and they're not really used to seeing ducklings around the street. It's also, there's not as much traffic, so people tend to be driving faster. So again, you need to, get out there, make sure that you're signaling far enough in advance that the driver can stop. And if you feel, if you feel unsafe, then you want to, look out for your own safety first, because the moms, believe it or not, are pretty good at avoiding traffic. I see something.
Thank you.
That. What happens if during a rescue the residents don't cooperate? Has this ever happened?
I'll answer that one, April, because yes, it has happened. It happened last year. We were on a roof in Georgetown that had a pool, and it had a perfect shed stairwell that we could have captured the mom in. But every time the door, if you kept the door open, the alarm system would go off every 20 seconds and it would spook the mom away. And we asked the owner of the building, couldn't he just turn the alarm off while we captured the mom. And he absolutely refused to do it. And there was no way we could capture the mom. And we had to take the ducklings in and orphan them. And it was incredibly frustrating. The best thing you can do is try to provide education to those people and tell them why you're doing what you're doing. But every now and then you get somebody who's just not going to cooperate, and there's not a lot you can do about it. I don't know if you have anything to add, April.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that alarm was probably the most frustrating example, but there have been people who, say, absolutely, I do not want a duck in my apartment, and that's happened a couple of times that I can think of. And so they make what could be a pretty straightforward, easy situation into a much more difficult situation.
There's another question from Barbara that we skipped, go back to it. Where, for example, would we do a capture and release on site? One place we could do that is at the Botanic Garden. You could capture the family and simply release them out at the front door of the Botanic Garden, and that mom would make it across the street into the Capitol reflecting pool. The situation where that works is where the water source is very close to the place where the birds are trapped.
Anything else?
Hi, this is Suzanne. I had a quick question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any, like, when moving, the mom and the babies away, is there any concern about like moving them to a water source away from the drake? Like, does that cause any stress, or like if they get separated, are there any kind of issues there to think about?
So the drake is not always going to be waiting for mom. That's ideally what happens. He protects her. We love to see it, but if we're not sure, well, so for instance, if the ducks thought the swimming pool was going to be their water source, then you're going to have to take them to a place other than where they planned.
Got it.
But that tends to work out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
There's that's a really excellent question, and it deals with the entire life cycle of the animal. What we've found, I would say that in rare cases, we're getting it right. And we know that the drake comes over and identifies with the hen, and they live happily ever after. That does happen. And it's very obvious when you release the mother, whether the drake approaching her is her drake or not. If it's her drake, they're all lovey-dovey and they bill each other. And if it's not her drake, she starts hissing and spreading out her feathers, and he starts trying to rape her, and it's really ugly. And that's the reason that her own drake is there. He protects her from the other males who want to rape her. And we've watched these rape scenes, and they're pretty horrendous. The male will jump on top of the female, even if she's got ducklings there, and press her head underwater and then mate with her. But what we find is that after the mating is over, the stranger, the rapist, he's got what he wants. He leaves, and he pretty much leaves her alone. So although it's ideal if we can locate her with her drake, she can survive and raise her young very adequately after about the first day if there's no drake there. And in cases where we know that the ducklings haven't survived after we've released them, she'll often be back at the same nesting site 3 weeks later or 5 weeks later, having found her drake and laying another clutch of eggs. They can actually lay up to 3 clutches of eggs in a season. If they lose all of their ducklings in the first clutch, they'll lay a second clutch and even a third clutch, and that's always with the same drake. So she manages to find him even if we don't get it right.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, or if we did get it right, but he wasn't, he was off with his buddies. And, I will say that the most common reason that an entire clutch, won't survive once they've gotten to water is really bad weather. Probably the second most common reason is predation. So what do our volunteers do? Well, when we know that there's a nest from which an escort is going to be necessary, so the downtown Golden Triangle area, Foggy Bottom, Georgetown, we like to have volunteers regularly monitor that nest. So in conjunction maybe with a resident or people who work nearby, just to kind of, check on her, make sure everything's okay. We can try to get some intel on when she was first noticed and how many eggs she has. If we can get that accurate, we can figure out very closely when the ducklings are going to hatch and when we'll need to do an escort. So that leads to the second bullet point, which is escorts and rescues. Obviously, these are both much easier when we know that there's a situation. There's a duck nesting in my balcony. There's a duck nesting in front of my building. Sometimes we get called to do these when we had no idea. We do get some help from DC Animal Care and Control, but we try to help out where we can. And for this, it's really important for me to know kind of your geography. Where do you live? Where do you work? What are kind of the parts of the city that you can get to quickly? We do regular monitoring at Constitution Gardens and the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool. This takes about an hour. All you're doing is walking around and counting nests and broods, age of the brood. Also, obviously, if you see anybody in trouble, either dealing with that or calling in the people who can help. And lastly, we do daily monitoring at the Capitol Reflecting Pool. And for that, we currently have shifts available on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And that typically starts at the end of April and goes through the fall. So it'll go through most of October unless Architect of the Capitol drains the pool early. We do have subs available and you can do your shift at any time during daylight hours. And so after we're done today, I'm going to send everybody a link to the slides so you have them. I'm also going to send you a link to a volunteer sign-up sheet. And so if you're interested in volunteering, fill out the fields on that sheet and I will be in touch with you. And lastly, as we come to the end, just want to lighten things up a little bit. We talked a lot about individual situations today, but remember that as you do this work, you're actually building support for wildlife in the community and getting people to appreciate how cool it is to watch ducks. And finally, we want to remind everybody to keep a sense of humor. You could tell in some of those videos we watched that this can get a little bit stressful. So it doesn't hurt to be silly sometimes. And the rest of the slides I'm not going to use, but we'll give them to you for your resources. Lots of fun videos you can watch. And finally, here's our contact info, City Wildlife, Animal Care and Control, and mine and Anne's emails and phone numbers.